Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, President Trump saying U.S. officials met with Chinese officials this morning. Meanwhile, Beijing denies that tariff talks happened at all. More on the conflicting statements.
And has there been any direct contact between the U.S. and China trade at all?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And
every day.
A former Pentagon intelligence officer said to serve 7 years behind bars. Details on the defense secrets he sold to China. 2 Boeing jets are back on American soil after China returned them. Now the aerospace giant says it could stop making planes for the country. At least 6 people are dead in China after a car drove into a crowd outside a school. Young children are among the victims. A look at what might have triggered the tragedy. And inside China's most sensitive circle, a major shakeup inside the regime is boiling. What could it mean for Washington's top adversary, Communist China? Analysts break it down. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Before we dive into today's news, make sure to use the link down below to subscribe to our newsletter. Each week we round up the highlights and controversies happening around China and the world and share an exclusive behind-the-scenes snapshot with our readers. Keep an eye out. The newsletter will land in your inbox Friday morning. President Trump just addressed what's been called ongoing active trade talks between the U.S. and China, but Beijing is dismissing his comments, calling them fake news. The president stood by his statement, reaffirming it once again Thursday afternoon. For now, the story is still developing.
Has there been any direct contact between the U.S. and China trade at all?
Yeah, of course.
And
every day.
President Trump said on Wednesday that the U.S. is now actively talking with China, sparking immediate reactions from Beijing. But one day later, Chinese officials from both the country's Commerce of Foreign Ministries denied the talks were happening. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson dismissed what it called fake news, saying, quote, China and the U.S. had not held consultations or negotiations on the tariff issue, let alone reached an agreement. In an effort to target various issues like fentanyl flowing into the U.S., supply dumping, and unfair state-based subsidies, the U.S. imposed 145% tariffs on imports from China. An additional penalty could see tariffs on select goods hit 245%. That sparked Beijing to retaliate with its own 125% tariff on U.S. goods. The standoff is raising global concern.
I'm not going to say, I'm going to play hardball with China. But ultimately, they have to make a deal because otherwise they're not going to be able to deal in the United States. So
President Trump admitted that the 145% rate was too high for trade with China. A report from the Wall Street Journal suggests that the White House is considering lowering it to between 50% and 65%.
How soon do you want to bring the tariffs on Chinese goods
well,
down?
that depends on them.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent addressed the issue on Wednesday, explaining that the tariff rate depends on China's actions.
China in particular, is in need of a rebalancing. Recent data shows the Chinese economy tilting even further away from consumption toward manufacturing. China can start by moving its economy away from export overcapacity and towards supporting its own consumers and domestic demand. Such a shift would help with global rebalancing that the world desperately needs.
He also offered advice to Beijing on resolving its economic troubles.
There is an opportunity for a big deal here, that the U.S. is looking to rebalance to more manufacturing. The identity of that would be less consumption. If China is serious on less dependence on export-led manufacturing growth and a rebalancing toward a domestic economy.
Meanwhile, China has held on to its hardline response, at least in the public eye. A Chinese spokesperson declared, quote, if you want to fight, we will fight to the end. Despite that, reports show Chinese factories are slowing production and sending workers home. Analysts suggest the Chinese regime has made up its mind to play hardball with the Trump administration, and that from Beijing's perspective, in order to make a deal, Trump must make the first move to call Xi Jinping.
I hope we can make a deal. Otherwise, we'll set a price, and hopefully they'll come here and they'll contribute, and if they don't, that's okay.
Earlier this afternoon, President Trump confirmed that the U.S. officials met with Chinese officials this morning, though he offered no further details.
To discuss the latest tariff showdown between the U.S. and China, NTD's Steve Lance tapped John Sidelides for insight. He's a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and a former diplomacy consultant for the State Department.
John Sidelides, thank you so much for joining us here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, China is saying that negotiations between the U.S. and the CCP are not occurring right now, and they said that in order for that to happen, the U.S. needs to drop some of its tariffs first. What kind of situation is the CCP in here? If they make the first move, does that make them lose face?
Well, let's keep in mind, first of all, that there's a difference, and maybe this is purely semantic, in how one approaches quote-unquote negotiations or dialogue. The Chinese tend to be, at least under the CCP, very formalistic, very methodical, and probably absolutely correct in their public pronouncements that there are no formal negotiations, no formal dialogue taking place. At the same time, Team Trump is saying that they're in constant contact, which they probably are at a very low level. And so from Trump's perspective, it's taking advantage of every opportunity to see whether or not there is something that connects Washington and Beijing to then begin to formalize a process for negotiations, while Xi Jinping and his team are saying there's no dialogue and no negotiations taking place. So both can actually be accurate at the same time.
And on the other end of this is how long China's economy can hold out. We have Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent saying that China can move in the direction of from its overcapacity, overconsumption, overcapacity exports to helping its own domestic demand, and that the U.S. will help it do so. How is that likely to go over with the CCP?
That's going to be quite the challenge, I think, from Washington's perspective. China is, I think, in a position both to be able to absorb the blows, both economically and politically. And there's really not much talk about the political controls that an authoritarian regime like the Chinese Communist Party maintains over 1.3 billion Chinese citizens, which is an important part of this. I mean, Trump, to his disadvantage, is the president of a democracy. There are so many different inputs from voters, from lawmakers at various levels, from chief executives of major corporations, to lean on the White House to explain why these tariff negotiations, if they come into place, or the trade war overall, are very deleterious to these constituents and these stakeholders. You don't have that in China. There are methods for oppressing any dissent, minimizing dissent, whether it's police surveillance, whether it's a crackdown, a very harsh crackdown in those areas, especially by workers that are rebelling, where they are most affected by the U.S. tariffs. So I think they're able to minimize any type of political dissent in a way that simply a democratically elected leader cannot. And economically, the sense that I have is that the Chinese economy and Chinese society is hardwired for a greater pain threshold. They can endure more pain than, say, the average middle-class American consumer if we have a prolonged trade war.
John Sidelides, thank you very much for your insights here today.
Thanks again for having me.
Next, a former Army intelligence analyst has been sentenced to 7 years behind bars. His crime, selling military secrets to someone he believed was affiliated with Beijing. Schultz pleaded guilty last August. According to the Justice Department, he illegally disclosed key defense information to a Hong Kong resident. And according to Schultz, that individual is associated with the Chinese regime. So what exactly has been leaked to China? The information passed to the person included details that could be useful if Washington were to defend Taiwan from a Chinese invasion, information about U.S. rocket and hypersonic systems, and U.S. assessments about Chinese military tactics and its rocket force. Court documents show Schultz received over $40,000 in exchange. What's more, Schultz and his conspirator attempted to recruit another Army intelligence analyst into their scheme. That analyst was serving in the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command at the time. The command is at the forefront of combating aggression from Communist China. Attorney General Pam Bondi criticized Schultz for putting American service members at risk. She also vowed to, quote, ensure that those who leak military secrets spend years behind bars. The FBI also warns that China has been aggressively targeting U.S. military personnel. But that's not all. The U.S. intelligence community also reported recently that Beijing has been trying to poach U.S. intelligence officers and other government employees. 3 Chinese nationals have been sentenced for taking part in a gift card fraud scheme. They used the money to buy expensive electronics, which they then shipped to China. Here's a closer look.
The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of New Hampshire announced Tuesday the 3 convicts have been sentenced to several years in prison each. 2 of them were also living in New Hampshire illegally. A Homeland Security special agent said Tuesday the 3 individuals were part of a Chinese transnational criminal organization that stole and laundered millions of dollars through gift card theft. Prosecutors said they accumulated more than $100 million in gift cards by hacking American companies and then targeting vulnerable Americans.
Boeing's CEO warning the aerospace giant would stop making planes for China. That's after Chinese airlines returned 2 Boeing jets. CEO Kelly Ortberg said China returned the jets due to recent U.S. tariffs, adding the company is ready to find new customers for the aircraft. Here's more.
Boeing has confirmed that its Chinese customers are refusing to take delivery of new jets as tariffs raise prices. Speaking Wednesday, Chief Executive Kelly Ortberg said many airlines in China now won't accept deliveries. 2 737 MAX jets which had been ferried to the country returned to the US last week. Then on Thursday, a 3rd new plane, slated for Air China, started making its way back. Reports by Bloomberg last week claimed that Beijing has actually ordered carriers not to accept new planes. It all could be a big headache for Boeing, with China accounting for about 10% of its airliner order backlog. The company had been due to deliver about 50 new planes to the country just this year. However, Ortberg says Boeing can find solutions. He says unwanted jets can easily be diverted to new customers, since the air travel sector currently faces a global shortage of new planes. Airliners had been traded free from all duties under a global agreement dating back to 1979. While Washington has now signalled a willingness to de-escalate the dispute, analysts say confusion over tariffs could leave many aircraft orders in limbo. Earlier this month, Delta Airlines said it would defer all deliveries of jets from Airbus while the trade war lasted. The new dispute is also terrible timing for Boeing, which was only just recovering from a near 5-year freeze on exports of its 737 MAX jets to China. That followed restrictions imposed by Beijing after 2 fatal crashes involving the type.
Coming up, at least 6 people are dead in China after a car drove into a crowd outside a school. Young children are among the victims. A look at what might have triggered the tragedy. And inside China's most sensitive circle, a major shakeup inside the regime is broiling. What could it mean for Washington's top adversary, Communist China? Analysts break it down.
The most notable characteristic of the Chinese military is that it was built not for external defense, but for internal control.
Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Shifting to southern China, a chilling moment. On Tuesday, a silver car rammed into a crowd outside a school around 6 p.m. local time, the same hour most parents pick up their children. Witnesses told us that at least 6 people were killed. As of early Thursday, Chinese authorities haven't released details on injuries or deaths 2 days after the incident. And just a warning, some viewers may find this video disturbing.
In one social media video, many people hit by the car can be seen lying on the ground, including children. After it stopped, angry bystanders were banging on the car windows, with some attempting to move the vehicle to rescue those trapped underneath. Right now, the news is largely censored on China's internet. Discussions and videos were also scrubbed from Chinese social media platforms. We called the school for comment, but did not hear back before airtime. According to a Chinese media report, local police and hospitals refused to comment on the incident. This is at least the 3rd tragedy of its kind in China this month. Analysts say people who feel desperate under the communist regime's ruling, plus a sluggish economy, tend to choose to take revenge on society.
Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping is facing challenges on multiple fronts, not just a heated trade war with the U.S., but as insider sources disclose, Xi is also struggling with infighting within the Chinese regime. As of now, a group of Chinese defense officials who are key to Xi's power framework have been purged from their posts or have disappeared from the public eye. Here's the catch. Officials that remain in key positions are loyalists of another powerful man inside the Communist Party. Who is he and how is this internal fight shaping Xi's power frame within the regime? NTD's Flora Hua tapped 3 China analysts for insight.
The most notable characteristic of the Chinese military is that it was built not for external defense, but for internal control. Its purpose is not to protect the country, but to safeguard the Chinese Communist Party's regime.
Unlike any elected governments like the United States, the Chinese Communist Party started as a militia without any legal foundation in China. It only climbed to power by ousting China's then legitimate nationalist government, forcing it to flee to Taiwan. The loss came as the nationalists were exhausted by an 8-year war with Japanese forces. For a totalitarian regime, retaining absolute control over its military is essential for top leaders to stay in power. In comparison, the position of U.S. president is filled by winning a democratic election and being sworn into the White House. Likewise, the president becomes the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military during his defined 4-year term. But this is not the case in Communist China. Taking current regime leader Xi Jinping as an example, when he took power in 2013, he carefully and systematically replaced people he didn't trust. He positioned his loyalists to serve in key military positions, which wouldn't threaten his authority. But in the absence of term limits, oftentimes Chinese officials are replaced through political purges in the name of cleaning up corruption. After leading the regime for over a decade, many China experts say Xi has achieved the level of tyranny would make Mao Zedong envious, the man who led communism to take power in China. But here comes a twist. Since last year, suspicions have circulated that Xi's most reliable, trusted officials inside China's military are being targeted by political infighting. Tan Jingyuan is a China affairs commentator who has been working with NTD's Chinese language edition for years.
If Xi Jinping still truly holds absolute power, if he can arrest anyone at will, then how is it possible that he shows no mercy toward his own loyalists, while leaving alone those who are openly disrespectful or pose a clear threat to him? Instead of targeting his real opponents, he's going after people from his own faction. To me, this is inexplicable. The only reasonable explanation is that there is actually a faction within Xi's own camp that's now opposing him. They are using the anti-corruption campaign that Xi himself launched as a tool to purge his influence within the military.
But again, in order to purge Xi's influence, the opposition would first have to purge his loyalists. As for who might be next in line for ouster, speculation has zeroed in on Xi's right-hand man, the third-in-command of China's military, He Weidong. NTD, as well as the Washington Times and Financial Times, reported that He is likely the latest victim of the regime's internal struggles after he disappeared from the public for a month. The news cited the Pentagon, U.S. intelligence, and insider sources in China. His removal could put an end to Xi's control over the military. Another of Xi's military officials may be in a similar situation. Admiral Miao Hua is currently suspended from his duties and under investigation. It's worth noting, both He and Miao served in the same branch in southern China's Fujian province for years. It's also the same place Xi Jinping spent 17 years of his political career before becoming the regime's leader. Qin Peng has been a commentator on Chinese affairs with NTD for years. He pointed out that nepotism is a fundamental theory behind the CCP's appointment of officials instead of individual merit.
Based on loyalty to the leader, regional ties, and factional affiliation, Xi Jinping promoted members of his own faction, such as He Weidong and Miao Hua, thereby consolidating his power. At the same time, he further used his anti-corruption campaign to create room for his trusted allies to gain more influence.
The Chinese military is currently controlled by a group of 6 people, a body known as the Central Military Commission. At its head is regime leader Xi Jinping. Given the apparent ousters of Wei Dong and Miao Hua, let's take a look at the other 3 who are still active in China's political circle. Those are Vice Chair Zhang Yuxia and members General Liu Zhongli and General Zhang Shengmin. Here's the kicker: the 2 generals are known for their close connections to Vice Chair Zhang. Therefore, with Xi's other 2 loyalists reportedly removed from power, that would leave Xi outnumbered 3-1, meaning the governing body that controls China's military is now under control of its second-in-command, Vice Chair Zhang Yuxia. And whoever controls the military,
In the Chinese Communist Party system, whoever controls the guns holds the real power within the party. So right now, the anti-Xi faction is focused on seizing Xi Jinping's control over the military. That's the part they're trying to strip away.
Now, this is all business as usual if Zhang remains loyal to leader Xi Jinping. But this may no longer be the case. Zhang Yuxia used to share close ties with Xi Jinping, but Zhang is a veteran general who fought in the Vietnamese War and has extensive war experience and a high reputation within China's military. And like all regime leaders, Xi Jinping has major power ambitions, meaning he likely began to worry that Zhang's influence could threaten his own control.
The Chinese Communist Party's promotion system for military officers also sows the seeds of future factional struggles and instability. This was a key reason behind the eventual breakdown in the relationship between Zhang Yuxia and Xi Jinping.
On top of that, in 2023, Xi removed Zhang's closest aide, Li Shangfu, from China's Central Military Commission, citing serious corruption plots. Li Shangfu had also been China's defense minister. Analysts say the move is essentially what caused a rift between Xi and Zhang. That's because through investigating Li, who was Zhang's aide, Xi could have obtained evidence that could be used to take down Zhang as well. Zooming out, there are other hints that point to Zhang's growing power. Last year, then National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with Zhang Yuxia in Beijing. The two held talks on defense cooperation between the U.S. and China. What's more, when Zhang visited Vietnam last October, the Vietnamese regime greeted him the same way they received Xi Jinping. Zhang, a senior military official, was able to meet with the country's top leaders. That honor is typically reserved only for the top leaders of foreign countries. Flora Hua, NTD News.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.